welcome everyone. Like I said, my name is Keely, and I am the East Metro Regional Manager with Conservation Minnesota. With us today from the White Bear Area Neighborhood Concerned Citizens Group are Lee, Sherry, and Kelly, who are all board members for the neighborhood group. Moderating and asking questions of this group of our unwitting community activists is Conservation Minnesota's Policy Director, Nels Paulson. A little bit about Conservation Minnesota. We focus on building a diverse and passionate statewide network and understanding people's unique interests around conservation issues here in Minnesota. We match people's passions with credible information and meaningful opportunities to have a positive impact for your family, your community, and kind of just the future of all of us as Minnesotans. And we do this mostly by listening, building local progress in and with communities, and creating pragmatic solutions. So we also report the actions of state and local officials on our website. So we really try to have some government accountability and work with your representatives and senators to make sure that we're advocating for policies that impact you and really champion environmentalists in the legislature. So an example of this work is successfully organizing around the issue of banning TCE. So thank you all for being here to talk about this issue. A little bit about the White Bear Area Neighborhood Concerned Citizens Group. They formed after the company Water Gremlin was found to be polluting the toxic chemical TCE at higher levels than permitted in White Bear Township. They were permitted to release about 10 tons of TCE per year, but over the course of 17 years, they released more than 1,000 tons into the White Bear area community. I'm just gonna put someone else here real quick. They, sorry, give me 1 second, I apologize. Don't want anyone to miss it. So they were emitting about 1,000 tons into the White Bear community over 17 years, and this community group really came together by chance around the time a stipulation agreement between the Pollution Control Agency and Water Gremlin was being signed in early 2019. So the group really believed that the process surrounding the agreement was rushed and with virtually no community notification or discussion on the issue. They disagreed with the terms of the agreement and felt that they didn't have a voice in something that affected them the most in their community. So right after the agreement, community members, 3 of which are here with us tonight, started meeting together and organizing. Within 5 days, they called for and held a meeting with a bipartisan group of state and local officials, as well as the Department of Health and the Pollution Control Agency, during which they outlined their 4 key asks, and the women are going to highlight and discuss these more during our conversation. So after a year of organizing and activism, Minnesota passed the country's first ban on TCE with the country's only split state legislature after, like I said, about a year of community activism. And tonight we'll be talking about how a community can unite around a public health issue to impact statewide legislation. So this group played a crucial role in advocating for and pushing this policy across the finish line, which is really important to getting legislation passed. And they brought together a lot of stakeholders to find answers and solutions and make this significant change beyond their own community. Now it impacts all of us in Minnesota that breathe air, drink water, etc. So how does a neighborhood group form, and how does grassroots organizing pressure the legislature to take action? How can relationships be leveraged to tackle such persistent pollutants such as TCE? And how can you as attendees perhaps learn to lead on a local issue? And how can partnerships, compromise, bipartisanship, accountability, etc., be utilized to implement these long-lasting solutions that we're all working towards? So this work is continuing even after the legislation was passed, and so this group's going to update us on what's next for their community activism and how a group of people can build power to ignite policy change at any level. So there will be time for an audience Q&A at the end, so please write your questions in the chat box and we'll get to them towards the end of the discussion. And now I'm going to toss it over to our guests here tonight to tell us a little bit about themselves, and then Nels will begin the discussion shortly thereafter. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Lee, and I live in the White Bear area, just about a quarter of a mile away from Water Gremlin. And prior to learning, I remember the day that I got the letter in our box in our mail that there had been a pretty significant pollution issue. And I was thinking that maybe it had just been going on for, 3 or 4 weeks. And I was really, really concerned. I was trying to figure out what TCE is and all of this other stuff. Pulled together a few community or a few neighbors, and we talked a lot about it and made a pact to go to the community stakeholder meetings, or to go to the meetings where the MPCA was going to be talking to us. I didn't really know at that point in time what I was going to embark on. I do volunteer within my community. I volunteer for a baseball manager, a hockey team manager, a Girl Scout cookie mom, kind of those types of volunteer efforts I feel are really important. If I'm going to be putting my kids out there, it takes a lot of work to make that all happen. So that's something that I feel really passionate about. But as I started to get involved with this, I realized that all of a sudden I was going to become something that I never thought that I was going to become: an environmental activist, a community activist, and somebody who actually understood a little bit more about how our political system works. So Sherry, Kelly, you go next.
Hi, I'm Kelly Kapkan, and first of all, thank you, Conservation Minnesota, for having us tonight. We're very happy to be here. And how did we start to get involved and become community activists? It's a very good question. I went to the MPCA evening presentation to discuss this issue and was just shocked by the duration of what had happened. And honestly, really just started to ask myself, like, wow, how does this happen? And this shouldn't be allowed to happen. And if you don't start to get involved, who will? So it was pretty simple. Likely, I had no background in any type of activism and had been involved in my community in other ways, but never on any environmental issues. And so it was very much a surprise to me, and I'm sure my husband, but that's how we found ourselves involved.
I will echo what both Lee and, I'm Sherry Smith. I will echo what both Lee and Kelly said, and that is sort of just fell into this. Started with a letter to our homes that was pretty disturbing, even though it was drafted in such a way that it was intended to not alarm, but you could read through that. And frankly, when I attended the first meeting, maybe 10 days after receiving that letter, hosted by, MPCA and MDH, it became clear, it seemed to be clear there was a lot of downplaying of what had happened, and a lot of, we're not going to incite any kind of panic in the community, which only caused me and the others to want to dig deeper and dig further. So that's how it all started, very organically.
Thanks, Lee and Kelly and Sherry. My name is Nels Paulson. I'm the Policy Director at Conservation Minnesota. And it's been a pleasure to work with the neighborhood group. And I'm really glad we're here today getting to tell their story. And I just wanted folks to know who are watching from home that if you have questions, you can hold them to the end, or there's a chat feature at the bottom of Zoom. If you want to put your questions in the chat box, I'll be keeping an eye on that. And and I'll try and run through a couple questions to lay out the how and why and what happened in this community. So I'll maybe start by backing up, and we're really proud of becoming the first state in the country to ban TCE like this. But I think it's important to understand how the neighborhood group found out about this. And Lee, you kind of touched on that a little bit, but I think you and Sherry were going to elaborate a little bit more to discuss how you found out about the issue.
Sherry, I'll let you kick it off.
No worries. So literally, it was a letter that was delivered to my home, all of our homes, I think, that were in a certain radius of the plant, of the water gremlin plant. And again, in reading this letter, it just became clear there was a lot of shroud going over what the message was, inside the letter, and it invited us to attend some large community meetings hosted by both MPCA and MDH, and we started talking almost immediately, and at least the three of us meeting almost immediately, even in advance of those meetings. When we first went to the community meetings, I was stunned at what I was seeing and hearing had happened. I was stunned at the the downplaying of, yes, this happened, but really there's no cause for alarm, which told me right away there was huge cause for alarm. And that's kind of how it started.
Really? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I very distinctly recall emerging from those meetings, and they were long and took a lot of concentration to try to understand what was being presented to us. But excuse me, it's not COVID. I remember meeting in the lobby with other interested people, interested in forming a grassroots organization, and just scribbling names and phone numbers and email addresses that night. But I knew it was a big deal almost immediately when there was media presence. WCCO was there, Channel 5 was there, I think Channel 11 was there, and they were trying to garner interviews with citizens before we'd even gone into the presentation, which I found interesting. I did speak with them, but I in retrospect, I wish I would have said, talk to me after the meeting. So over to you, Lee.
So Don, I can answer your question as part of this answer. The source of the letter was from Water Gremlin. And there was nothing else that had come out previously about it. And again, there was really no time frame on it. Keely, if you want to pop up, do you have that graph? What we found out after the stipulation agreement was signed very quickly, the 1st of March, what we found out when we read that document was that Water Gremlin had vastly exceeded their permit levels. You can see here the red line that they were permitted to release, I think it was 10 tons per year. And you can see what they actually emitted every single year. And what we found out as well was that in 2018, once they had started to talk with the MPCA about it, they had a handshake agreement that they were going to curtail their production. But when you go and you look at the actual emissions, they ramped them up. And that is one of the reasons that 2018 is as high as it is. Keep in mind that when I first got this letter, I was thinking that my kids, I have 3 kids who have, they're now 18 and 15 and 15, twins. They learned how to walk here. And so again, I was thinking that maybe this was just a few months, a few weeks. And then I find out that this has been going on since 2002 at these levels. So this was a really big deal, and this was something that made me angry. In fact, when we heard that that there was a stipulation agreement that was signed and fines that were attributed or assigned or given to Water Gremlin on March 1st, just days after our MPCA meetings, I was shocked. I was shaking. I was at work. I had to pull myself aside. I composed a long, terse message to Commissioner Bishop. And I was not the only one who was angered and surprised that such a decision was made so quickly. So I feel like Nell probably got a little bit off topic. Go ahead, Kelly.
But I want to quick ask, Lee, do you know, or any of you, why the production ramped up so much in 2018, and conversely, what was the cause of such a lower production level in 2004, 2009?
Yeah. So, this is, I don't have anything really to back this up besides what I've seen as a history of the way that Water Gremlin operates. So with that, what we have seen from Water Gremlin is that they have a history of contamination. There was action that was actually going on in the late 1990s against them that was supposedly wrapped up in 2004. And then this was happening kind of at that overlap stage. What we see from Water Gremlin is a history of just trying to make things work out the way that they need them to work out. I mean, they got a duty of candor violation because they did it on purpose, from everything that we can tell.
From what we can tell, they saw some regulatory action coming imminently, and they have demonstrated over and over a disregard for the permit, for human health, for the environment. And though they said in writing back to MPCA that they were going to reduce operations, later it was revealed that they did not do, that they actually ramped them up, which resulted in 110 tons of emission of TCE off a 10-ton permit.
And I think what's important to know here is that there's a member of our group. She never comes to any meetings, but she is always so great at just giving us very detailed technical analysis. And she reminds me every time, Lee, this is what Water Gremlin reported. There's no validation of these numbers.
Speaking of which, there is no validation of these numbers. The graph that you're looking at, which is indeed disturbing, all right, represents self-reporting. Which we've also been trying to change that that privilege, if you will, for companies, especially companies that are proven violators. They should no longer be allowed self-reporting privileges. But what you're looking at is what Water Gremlin has admitted to emitting.
So Keely, I will say one more thing. You asked kind of why they did it. One of the things that has really surprised me all along is that Water Gremlin has not addressed the community. They have not answered a few requests that we've had of them to meet with them. So we don't actually know why.
Thank you, guys. I know that there's a lot of emotion, and we want to work on broader issues like self-reporting in the environmental world, but we also want to be able to tell the story of how you were successful in this one small chunk addressing TCE. So I'm going to keep moving us down that path, if that's okay, guys. And Kelly, I think I'm going to combine a couple of questions for you. And we know that you guys all started meeting when the letters hit, but how did you realize that you needed to add other members, and how did you educate the group on a pretty technical or maybe a unknown issue to most members, I would assume?
This group has always been driven by its full membership. We're not actually members, it's more participants. But what we started to do is just try to gather people in our community. And I see a few of them on the call tonight. Thank you for joining. And just start to create platforms where people could come together in the way that they wanted to communicate. So, and not be judgmental in the way that they did it. Some people prefer to communicate online. Some people like to go to community meetings. So we started with a Facebook page. We have a public Facebook page that anyone can see. And then we have a private Facebook page that people have to request to be members of. And we keep that to just community members, no press and no one else. So people could start to discuss the issues among ourselves and start to learn and understand. Creating a website and having regular community meetings and really trying to have discussions among the whole community to determine what's important to everyone and then define our focus. So, and what we defined our focus as is understanding the past and what happened to us, ensuring that we're protected moving forward into the future, and also asking for accountability. So what we did is just define the purpose of our group and then look for other people that were interested in joining and allow them to join in any way that they wanted to participate. And you know, you find a lot of people with a lot of different talents and knowledge in different areas, and we just tried to draw from any of those resources or resources that in other communities that we could.
And I'm going to again kind of interject a new question, and I think Lee, if you have any thoughts about organizing and bringing the group together, feel free to address those. But then I'm also curious, I think we had talked about this before, on how you started to get your voice listened to as an organization, and both with elected officials and the broader community and media. Because it seems like within a short amount of time, you guys are able to start having conversations with elected officials and the MPCA and a number of other groups that you weren't talking with just weeks and months earlier.
So there is so much of the story to tell, which you can already sense that we're kind of bouncing around from different facets of it. One of the things that we did immediately was work to become very disciplined with what our focus was, because there's so much that we could do and so much that we wanted to do. So Kelly mentioned that we were very focused on what happened to us. And there was a whole list of things that we wanted to do to kind of understand that, and we prioritized those. And then we were really focused on another area of focus is how do we make sure we're protected for the future? And then there was a whole list of things that went along with that. And then the third area was around accountability, wanting to make sure that we were looking for accountability wherever we could. What happened? How was it that this could go on for this many years without anybody finding it? Those were questions that we still ask the MPCA and MDH. So back to your question, Nels, it's through a lot of focus. And then as we were working with media, we used that exact same focus. So those started to become kind of our talking points. So as we were talking with somebody, if it was around a remediation results, we really focused our message on understanding what happened to us, leading with the big story, with the big line, which is our community has been poisoned over 17 years with highly excessive emissions of TCE. How excessive? Let me tell you. So now what we're finding out, and then you would get into kind of the meat of the story. So working to kind of keep anchoring back up to one of those things, figuring out your message and making it be simple is the hardest thing, but it's the most important thing that you have to do, because nobody knows your story better than you do. And you've got to get them like something that makes them passionate enough to want to go and dig in and find out more. So message.
And I want to say, unfortunately and very sadly, the message, the core message at the bottom of all of this was so dramatic. It was not that hard, you know, to tell it factually and have people, you know, be as shocked as we were.
Yeah, we certainly understand the kind of the outrage or the shock factor that draws attention to the issue. But we're you know, Conservation Minnesota spends a lot of time in St. Paul advocating with state legislators. Were they part of your group early, or how did you start communicating with those folks?
So Keely mentioned within 5 days of one of our first meetings or finding out about this, that we pulled together, and actually she's not here, Sherry Hastings, pulled together all of our legislators, our county commissioners, local government, Mayor Emerson. White Bear Township didn't necessarily participate that much at the beginning, although they were sending representatives. So pulled together a strong cross-section of people. And during that meeting as well, we prepared for that, and we had 4 very key asks as well. So again, being very focused about what it was that we were asking. And one of our advisors early on said, your elected officials are accountable to you. They need to listen to you. You tell them to listen to you, and you make asks of them for what it is that you want done. You are who put them in office.
We started with those in attendance, and frankly, there were senators, state senators, and representatives in attendance at these first community meetings hosted by MPCA and MDH. I collected business cards and came home and started following up, and I didn't have, I wasn't concerned about party affiliation. I was concerned about action and accountability. And again, as Lee said, requiring those individuals to take action on our behalf.
And I'd like to tack on there just for a minute, if I could. You know, that was a very important meeting, and we really prepped for it. So this was our first big meeting, and we were fueled by fury and just ready to go. But we made sure that our asks were very defined in that meeting, and we made sure to have the right people in the room. And I'd like to add too, that these are really good people. These are people from the Minnesota Department of Health, our elected officials. And it wasn't just our fury, but theirs. You know, when you go back to that graph, and you don't need to pull it up again, but there was a red line at the bottom that was, again, that was a 10 tons. So this wasn't, you know, a short-term emissions. This is never, ever did they go, even did they hit their limit. They were always, always about double, triple their emissions allowance. And we're talking about hazardous air pollutants. And so we were fueled by fury. And then we found other people that were just outraged. You know, our elected officials really do care about the community and are very invested in it. And so when we had a well-defined message to the right people, it started us off with a lot of momentum. And then we continued to organize from there. And I will tell you that each one of us had written out what we were going to say in that meeting, because we wanted to be taken seriously. We wanted to make sure that we wouldn't talk over one another, and we wanted to get something started, and it really did. So, I mean, that is number one, is talk to the right people and make sure you know what your message will be.
Yeah, I was, you know, I remember learning about this actually from the commissioner of the MPCA very early in 2019. And then if we remember the legislative session there, we thought we had a chance to ban TCE. And at the end of the regular session, it didn't happen. And we were frustrated, and I assume you guys were frustrated. But what was remarkable to me was that the level of intensity stayed very high, both from your organization and from state elected officials. And throughout the summer, and then I think Conservation Minnesota might have had an event in the fall of 2019, and there was always the idea that we're going to come around in 2020 and we're gonna make this happen. And I'm curious, why do you guys think that level of intensity stayed so high, and how did you stay so focused on your ask?
We continue to meet as a community group every other week. We were getting together with 10 people, 20 people, bringing in guest speakers. We were keeping the conversation going. We were also keeping the conversation going with media, and we were meeting also on an every other week basis with the stakeholder group, which that stakeholder group was comprised of MDH, NPCA, senators, representatives, local government, county government. And so those every other week meetings with very, very pointed questions, finding out what happened to us, making sure we were protected for the future, and asking for accountability, I think kept the fuel to that fire, Nels.
And you mentioned media too. Eventually, it seems like there were some local journalists and other media members who weren't afraid to keep pushing a little bit on water gremlin. And I'm not sure if that's from you guys or from their own kind of journalistic instinct, but I think that helped keep the issue at a high attention level. Does that sound right?
Absolutely, and Jennifer Merrily is my hero. She said early on that WCCO, she's an investigative reporter by nature, and there was something in this that's just stuck out to her. And there were others as well. Star Tribune, Pioneer Press, and some of the other local networks also have covered this pretty frequently. But Jennifer is the one who's the champion behind it from a media standpoint. She said early on that WCCO wasn't expecting her to necessarily report or to get things on the air every week, that they were allowing her to investigate or to invest time. And you saw within a few months how that time investment really paid off. That's when she found out that Water Gremlin was getting ready to move their operations over to Hudson, Wisconsin. And she broke that news. Hudson, Wisconsin realized what was getting ready to come into their community. The company that they were moving production to figured out what was coming into their community. They didn't want it, and they backed away from the deal.
Sorry, I've just got to pipe in on that. She trailed the truck over to Hudson with the camera crew, filmed them unloading their equipment, went and met with the mayor of Hudson. I mean, this is somebody that's got tenacity. Exactly. Wow.
But she did keep the fuel on she helped us keep the fuel on the fire. We kept the fuel on the fire, the community did, and the representatives and local and state and local government stayed with us.
Certainly in today, a picture or a video is worth so much more evidence. That's would make a difference.
One thing that I do want to add on is, Nels, I mean, groups like yours, groups like Conservation Minnesota, were also really important for us to learn. I mean, Kelly talked a little bit about how did you learn about these technical subjects? How did you learn how to navigate the political organizations? We leaned into a lot of different groups and experts to be able to help us figure that out. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet. We're thankful for you guys. And in fact, I think about when we were at the legislature going into 2020, and there were a few more obstacles that popped up towards the end of the 2019 legislative session that we didn't expect. And it was a pretty remarkable show of bipartisan pushing to get this bill across the finish line. I'm not sure if you guys have any kind of key memories on what was able to keep the momentum going in 2020. Because remember, this bill passed after the COVID outbreak started. So there was a global pandemic happening, yet you guys and the legislators were able to still get this across. Why? And how did you overcome some of those challenges? I think about some of the industries that use TCE weren't quite sure about whether they had a replacement chemical that was safer, and that was going to be a whole path that we had to kind of figure out.
And as Lee said, we have leaned into organizations that have helped the cause, if you will, including Conservation Minnesota. And oh my gosh, Kelly, help me out.
I'm not sure there have been a lot of organizations. Actually, I wrote down some. I know, MNTAP is
MNTAP. Thank you very much.
MNTAP. There are a lot of organizations across the United States and a lot of people that were interested in banning this chemical. So, yeah. But now going back to your question too. So, and how, first of all, I think that from a community perspective, just when things seem too complex, just keeping a spotlight on the issue really helps to move it forward, continuing to have these meetings. But when we started to move into 2019 and COVID, I have to tell you that things were really stalling out. This bill, it wouldn't have passed. And you're talking to a lot of people, and we have respect for all of those people. However, when it started to stall out after a year and a half of putting the amount of effort that all of us had put in and being as outraged as we were, we submitted a letter, and that letter actually was primarily crafted by Lee Thiel here, and she really called everyone out. And it was very much, it wasn't Republicans, it wasn't Democrats, it was, this is your job and we need to get this moving forward. And it's not okay that this is stalled out. And I can't remember the exact phrasing that was in the letter, but it was, it went out to everyone, and it got things moving again. And then there were a lot of phone calls. Sherry Hastings from our group was very instrumental in our key contact to a lot of the legislators, and a lot of pushing to get it, and compromises that were made too on both sides to get language that worked for everyone and to get the bill passed.
Compromise is a big thing. People didn't want to do it. Everybody was holding like, this is what I want, and it has to be this, or it's a pile of poo. And so towards the end, people started to compromise a bit. People were still angry about it, but we have to figure out how to come together and address what are our commonalities, so that we can keep the ball moving forward and make change.
Never lost sight of, even after the disappointment of 2019 trying to get this pushed through, we never lost sight of staying at it. continuing to meet with those stakeholders, either privately or again, every other Friday morning at 7 a.m. Virtually, well now virtually, but there was the tenacity that we stuck with it. There was no other choice for us.
I remember kind of a remarkable moment when we were still able to meet with the legislators in person in 2020, and we started going through the MPCA database on other communities that have been impacted by TCE pollution. And there are some questions in the chat box about air TCE pollution, which is primarily the white bear issue. But there are numerous communities in Minnesota who are still facing TCE pollution in their groundwater. And I remember talking to the legislators from St. Louis Park and Northeast Minneapolis and Edina and other communities. And they said, yeah, this TCE thing is a big deal. And we can't let the same stalling, bog us down. We got to keep moving. And I think that helped that it wasn't just a White Bear Lake issue, but you guys were sort of the tip of the spear, so to speak.
Well, and Nels, you guys helped us get connected with other communities, and I think that that's a big thing. I mean, that was incredibly important to get other legislators to realize that this was in their backyard, that it could be coming into their backyard, that it wasn't just an issue because some company, was a serial offender, but it was something that could legitimately happen anywhere. And so St. Louis Park, Fridley, and there was one other community that I'm missing for sure. I mean, it's all over the state. And so we got connected in with those groups, and that helped power us forward as well.
And actually not just across the state, it's across the country. I mean, ideally this TCE ban would be a federal ban. It would be a national ban. It's not the ideal situation for it to be a state ban. Fortunately, we live in what I consider to be a really, a progressive and a very good way state that looked at the facts. And because we didn't pass this with a federal ban, they chose to do it first because it impacts. It is more unusual for it to be these excessive air emissions, at least that we know of. Once it gets into the ground, it can go through preferential pathways, and there's something called vapor intrusion, which a lot of you might be very familiar with. And just like radon, it can seep into your basement and kind of unknowingly poison you because it's odorless and colorless. And so there are communities throughout the world probably, but definitely throughout the country. And this problem is way beyond Minnesota. And when you talk to some people, they'll say, TCE is just a nasty, nasty chemical. Unfortunately, it's not the only thing that's impacting people. And that's probably why a lot of you are on the call, I would assume. There might be something else that's impacting your community. But this was the one that was impacting our community, and we were lucky enough to get it, and fortunate enough that there were enough people involved here to get that ban passed.
Thanks, Kelly. And I should let folks listening know that Conservation Minnesota primarily works on state issues, but we are keeping an eye on this federal oversight over TCE and the broader toxic substances regulatory authority. And we want to make sure that first and foremost, Minnesota's ban isn't overruled by the federal government. And then I think, like Kelly said, it is affecting just about every state in the union. And we want to be helpful in figuring out how to protect all of the U.S. from having communities impacted in the future.
And when you really start looking, as we did, there are heartbreaking situations happening in California, in Indiana, in New Jersey. Children dying that most would agree is tied to TCE exposure.
That's one of the
other thing that really helped to get this passed. I believe Sherry had mentioned MNTAP, the Minnesota Technical Assistance Program. And they happened to request funding for a program prior to our issue, just prior, to help companies find alternate chemicals to use. And I really think that the fact that we funded that program and MNTAP exists also helped us ultimately to get this passed, because you can't just say that companies that are using something can't use it anymore. Putting companies out of business is not our intention or other people's. So helping them to still function and just use something that's a little bit more environmentally friendly is really important. So, I just like to say, I guess, shout out to them too. And we're so appreciative that we have that organization in our city, but in our state. And they also were kind enough to come out to our community meetings on a couple of occasions and answer some of our questions. So, there really have been a lot of organizations that have contributed.
And for those who are unfamiliar with the acronym MNTAP, it's the Minnesota Technical Assistance Program, and it's through the University of Minnesota. So if you Google it, you can find out how they're trying to improve some of the business best management strategies and save money and make products safer. So it's a pretty cool program. And that was actually one thing I remember in 2019 that did receive an additional boost of funding, even though the ban didn't get through. And Kelly, I think you're exactly right. It helped that there was a pathway for businesses to go down. We didn't just, it wasn't just a hammer with no helping hand. There was an alternative that they could use. I want to be a little conscientious of our time, but Vanessa, I think, had a pretty good question that I'm not sure of the answer. And Lee or someone else, do you want to discuss any of the health study or health impacts for residents? I know that some work was done, and then there's the entire lead issue that Water Gremlin had, but
yeah, well, I'm going to focus on TCE for the moment. Maybe Sherry or Kelly wants to tell the lead story. Again, so many layers to the story. The three of us are very fortunate to have not had what we think are serious health issues as a result of this, although we know of neighbors and community members who have had a series of issues that, cancer to immunological diseases to other things of that nature that seem as though they're at a higher risk. Jim Kelly, that seemed like they could very likely be connected, I should say. Jim Kelly with the MDH, I was cheering when I heard Jennifer Merrily get him to say, can we say that TCE caused these health problems? He said, no, we can't say that it did, but we can't say that it didn't either. And so that was a big thing. One of the asks that we had when we first met with everybody was that there be a health study conducted. And we were adamant about wanting that health study, and we still are adamant about wanting that health study, but it is a huge undertaking. And somebody was asking about finances earlier on. MDH doesn't support it. And so trying to figure out how to get it done is something that we have on our radar. It's just not a core focus right at this very moment.
I'm going to jump in and say what they've put forth to us instead of a proper health study is using data that we know does not apply to the situation. They're not looking at the community. They're not looking at those that worked at the plant. They're not looking at those that used to live here and no longer do. There is a comprehensive health study that does need to be initiated. And I think as Lee said, we're probably still trying to figure out how to make that happen.
So Kelly, do you want to hit the lead issue?
So lead is also obviously a chemical that impacts people's health really significantly. And because of the practices, lack of safety practices within Water Gremlin, there was a lot of take-home lead that was found, and the take-home lead was significant enough that there were many of the children of water gremlin workers that were found to have lead in their system. And you know, lead is really serious because it doesn't leave your body once it gets in there, and it doesn't show its effects right away. It shows them long-term and manifests in lack of memory and things like that. And so there have been a lot of hopefully improvements. They've put the way Water Gremlin was set up required employees after they'd showered to walk back through the plant. There was not proper PPE that was provided. And so the issue that we focused on the most was the TCE, but there was also a significant focus of both ours and the Department of Labor on looking at the lead and also the practices that had led to some really serious issues as well, and cleaning those up. So that has been another issue that we've been working on, but not quite to the extent that we've worked on the TCE.
Thanks, Kelly. I just want to put a little plug in that Conservation Minnesota is concerned about lead in all forms and in all situations, and whether it's lead pipes and drinking water or things like lead ammunition and fishing tackle. We know that there's no safe level of lead in children. And because of that, one of our long-term organizational goals is to get lead out of our commerce stream and out of the environment. But I think it's gonna take some work to do that.
And we mentioned the children at Water Gremlin, but you know, I would say it also is really concerning in how it impacts the workers. Unfortunately, from my perspective, there are a lot higher tolerances for workers because the feeling is that they've chosen to go into that environment. And so the levels of lead that the workers were exposed to is not above regulated levels. Apparently there wasn't as much lead poisoning found with the workers, but obviously when you're tracking that much lead home and the children are also getting impacted by it, it's significant. But you know, looking at lead, I think it's also important to note that this chemical impacts even workers too. So even necessarily, just because it's legal doesn't make it good. So it is currently permitted, the levels that they're exposed to.
So you guys have set up a couple of issues that are gonna be future issues that I think you might work on. Do you want to touch on what's next for your group and what advice you would have for other groups who are interested in accomplishing some of the goals that you guys have accomplished?
The first thing that's next on our list is the permit. The permit, they're operating underneath a stipulation agreement that is close to 2 years old, which is a very long time from everything that we understand. So the permit was supposed to be coming out after several delays in October, and now they're hoping for January. It recently got pushed back to Water Gremlin because of insufficient information or other things. So the permit is a big thing. So if there's anybody here who's an expert on permits, you can reach out to any of us. We would definitely take your help. See how you ask for help. And so permit is a big one, and then also understanding the remediation. So they are on their third round of study of the site to see exactly what has happened and how far the pollution has extended. So those are two of our big things. And Sherry and Kelly, I'll let you add on anything else as well as advice for other people organizing together.
I'd like to jump in and say my personal learning from this experience has been question everything. So I went into this believing that that somebody was watching out for me as an ordinary citizen, whether it was MPCA or MDH. We learned pretty early on, they don't have the resources, they don't have the legal clout. Those organizations are not your protectors. And everything we've questioned has turned up more and more and more, you know, to the point at times that it's horrifying. Do not ever accept the first thing you're told, because it's likely inaccurate. And it takes a lot of in fortitude to learn what needs to be learned to get to this point. And we did.
Sherry, I fully agree. And I also think that, so sometimes state agencies may not be doing as much as you think they are to protect you, but also sometimes companies are doing more wrong than you think they could. I think that most of the companies in our society are good corporate citizens, but when you have a bad actor or a culture in an organization that is perpetuated over years, it can be, I think, shocking that things continue to happen. Other things that propelled us forward were, it wasn't just the initial emissions. Then they found, you know, they found chemicals in the soil, and they found all kinds of different things throughout the course of the year that kept this situation moving forward. And so, you know, keeping an eye on what's happening is really important, I think, because, you know, from our perspective, things don't get fixed overnight. So if you have issues that occur initially, they're likely to continue occurring. So again, just keep your focus, and you have to look for that and hope for that cultural correction if there's companies, I think, that are egregiously violating over long periods of time. So Sherry, in addition to the, you know, you think people are looking out for you, don't think that just because they say they're going to fix something that it's fixed, or that that there aren't other things accompanying it.
I recall during one of the very first community meetings, hosted again by MDH and MPCA, being told, you know, it's probably next to impossible that TCE would go into the air in such a way that it could ever infiltrate soil or water. Turns out it did. And
Well, it can't go from the air to the soil, but it was that happened a different way, but it did go into the soil because they did leak it in their facility.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you guys have touched on a lot of long-term issues that are certainly on the radar at Conservation Minnesota when it comes to self-reporting environmental permits or non-expiring permits, or agencies that you think that have the authority to do one thing to protect you, but it turns out they don't have that authority. So those are issues that our organization is planning on working on for the long haul. And I just want to be conscientious of our time. There's about 5 minutes left, and folks have been pretty good about putting questions into the chat box, but I wanted to make sure that if anyone had any questions that they wanted to ask the group as a whole, now would be the time. And I trust you to be respectful and to unmute yourself as well. And if there aren't any additional questions, Lee and Kelly and Sherry, thank you for your time. Do you guys want to wrap up with any closing comments or words of inspiration to other communities who are facing similar scary challenges?
You know what, Greg, you asked this last question. Do you have any perspective on how to bring people together in this polarized time to work together on issues that they may not have, that may not have such a clear bad actor? That's tough. I mean, this was A, these are some challenging times, and B, this was an issue that was something that we all could definitively agree to was a big, big deal. But I think, I mean, with everything, it's like, why does it matter? So you have to figure out how to convey that messaging. Why does it matter? You have to listen. What is it that people are thinking? What is it that they're saying? Because a lot of times what I've felt in other situations is that people are preaching at me instead of like giving me an opportunity to sit back and listen and ask my own questions. So I think that that's something to kind of think about. And then, I mean, one of the things that we were very clear on with this situation is that even though we rely on politicians to help us keep the ball moving forward, we have to keep politics out of it. And that's been hard in some cases. In some cases, it's been easy. But we just have this understanding that as soon as we bring politics into it, we're going to start having two different sides, and we just need to keep it out of it and focus on what our common goal is that we want to have accomplished.
Thanks, Lee, and thanks, Kelly and Sherry. And I think that's all I have for questions. And I want to thank the folks who joined us today. Keely, is there anything you want to say to folks before we sign off?
Sure. I think for me, the biggest takeaway with this group of women was that you all had different experiences and different challenges, but you came together and still continue to come together. I think the biggest thing when trying to overcome a huge issue like this is the commitment. And so, like these women were talking about, there's still a lot to go. It doesn't just end when you have a legislative win or something like that. So I think being really committed to an issue and overcoming differences is the key to success long term. And so this is a great example of what can happen when people come together and really rally around an issue. And, you know, like Lee said, keeping politics aside, we all breathe air and we all want clean air at the end of the day, and we want clean water, and we deserve that as human beings sharing this space in this state. So I know that we can all agree on that at the end of the day, and you know, we at Conservation Minnesota are certainly working towards that. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and for the Citizens Neighborhood Group here for just continuing to be positive and hardworking towards the goals that we all have at the end of the day.
And if you need more information on the Citizens Group, I encourage you to Google White Bear Area Neighborhood Concerned Citizens Group, and you'll see their website, and you can get in touch with those folks. And if you need more information about Conservation Minnesota, just Google us or send me an email. It's nels@conservationminnesota.org. So, thanks everyone for your time this evening, and please take care, and good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us, Conservation Minnesota.
Yep.
Bye everyone. Thank you.